Welcome, Brittni Coe, CVA, to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I'm so excited to have you on the program. We have so many friends and colleagues in common, not just in Texas, but just throughout the nation. And you've been doing some really interesting and exciting work in the past couple of years, especially around implementing programmatic changes, and as have many of us, pandemic pivots and adaptations. So I'm excited to dig into some of those topics. But tell the folks playing along at home about your current position and what you do and what brings you joy in life.
Sure. So that's a lot. So I am the official title volunteer coordinator for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And unlike a lot of us, my job says exactly what I do. So I help coordinate volunteers. I am the liaison between staff and volunteers. But really, I am there to be a voice for the volunteers. Prior to my coming on, the museum did not have this position before. So I'm in a very fortunate position where they trust me. I have enough experience in those lovely 3 letters behind my name that when I throw up a suggestion, they're like, sure, well, you're the expert in the field. You're the in-house expert. So we're just going to go with it. So that's been nice. As far as what brings me joy, I'm a big music person. I too play piano. I love graphic novels, anything horror related. I know I'm all sunny and funny and I'm like, yeah, but I like slasher movies and reading. And I have 2 cats. So that they're my world. And no to you watching this at home, Dana and I did not coordinate outfits. This is just how it
we just happened to be navy blue twinsies today.
Yes.
I was what's something that isn't my jammies that I've been working in off camera the rest of the day.
I'm guilty of the mullet outfit as well. Business on top, pajamas on the bottom.
You know what? I might have some stretchy pants and slippers on right now, and
won't tell.
And no, well, we won't tell anyone. We won't tell anyone. It'll be fine. So that must be such a great feeling, and I think too few people in our sector have the feeling of knowing that they are the valued expert and they are respected in their position, and that helps when you are one responding to a crisis like, just as a random example, a 2 or 3 year long pandemic. 2, when that's a new position and you're building things from the ground up. So was there some infrastructure or programming in place, or did you do the whole build from scratch for your volunteer stuff?
There was some in place in the way that, so to let everyone know, we have 3 tiers of basic volunteering. So all of our volunteers begin their life in the same path, and then it's up to them as to which road they would like to follow. So we had that in place. We also have docents, like most museums do, and they're technically under our museum education team, and I am the person that straddles both of those worlds. So as far as creating a volunteer appreciation program, creating an annual audit, tracking volunteers, getting to know those, all of that, we kind of built up. As you mentioned, the pandemic made it a little bit hard to keep track of things. So before I started implementing changes, I had to be a fly on the wall. And so I had to learn my new landscape. I come from the world of social services volunteering. So I had to really get to know how to do everything over again before I could start producing a product. And so when it comes to implementing changes, I think that that's something that sometimes we get so into that, but there's a problem and I see that there's a problem and I want to fix it right now. But implementing the change without volunteer input is a good idea sometimes and sometimes not. So when is it a good idea? So for instance, we had to prevent gatherings of all sorts. Like we turned off our water fountains. We took the tables out of the break rooms. We wanted to have a visual cue that, we want you to be together and we want you to be part of the volunteer family and socialize somewhat, but, social distancing is really, I don't like that term. I prefer physical distance,
right?
Because you're not being social if you're yelling across the room. But we just had to do that. So we didn't give the volunteers input or say, well, where would you like your new break room to be? It was, we're removing break room furniture. Here's why. or recognizing that we have a need for all of our volunteers to follow the same procedure. I know I'm not alone out there when people say, oh, well, that'll work for the new volunteers and the people coming in, but what do I do about my most tenured people?
Mm-hmm. It's that they've been here longer than a lot of staff, or sometimes volunteers are the founders, or they are or have been board members or part of the Friends of, if there's an adjacent Friends of the Museum or something like that. I'm not saying York has that, but that's a pretty common phenomenon of unequal treatment. Or oh, the new people can adapt just fine, like not necessarily. And so with or without the chance for the team to give their input on the changes, what have you found was the easiest changes to make just without needing to consult with all of the volunteers that you inherited in your new role? And what were people resistant to as you were rolling out these changes?
I think the most of the resistance was to the people who wax nostalgic constantly. Like, oh, well, back in the day, or when we first started this program, and that's great. I wasn't there for that, and neither were most of the volunteers. So the challenge became, how do you find those nuggets of keeping the togetherness, which is what I heard people were wanting. I just had virtual meet and greets. I was new. People didn't know. We're like, oh, that's great. Lovely to meet you. Why are you here and what is your job? So getting to know them a little bit, giving them opportunities to just know that I am a sounding board, and that I'm taking suggestions. However, for the betterment of the entire program and per what my higher ups are instructing me to do, we just have to do this. So I think we've all been guilty of using the excuse, but because of COVID or due to staff changes or due to necessary expansions, exactly all of that buzzword. But we really had to reduce the roles of some of our volunteers. So what does that mean? Our docents, especially, they're the largest of our category of volunteers. They are the most tenured. They're the ones that are more likely to stay, but they weren't able to have as much time with the tours as they would want. So cutting the time short, making sure that they keep their distance, implementing pointers, not the laser pointers, but the ones you see in class, like slap on a map, here you go. And then having volunteers who returned due to COVID. So basically, to boil all that down, we had a lot of new paperwork. We had liability waivers. We had to keep letting people know, if you're sick, don't do this, do that instead. So that became a little bit, that was the easy part. Everyone was hearing that from the news. They were hearing it from our local health and human services people. But really the lack of socialization I found was the hardest. Telling people, don't hang out together. But also pivoting, I'm so tired of that word, but I wish there was another one.
We only have so many choices in English. It's not the most descriptive language on the planet, so we understand.
Yes, but making some of those things that used to be fun in-person events, like docent training. It was a 6-week course. You come to the museum at night, make a little snack. Everyone gets to know each other and learn. Well, now we're virtual, and we have to be able to offer those trainings at times of day that work for everyone. And even though we were being as accommodating as possible, we still couldn't capture everyone. So basically, regardless of that relationship, we had to keep moving forward in a way that was best for everyone. And the newer people didn't know any different, so fine with them. But keeping those people that have been riding with you since the beginning, or 2 museums ago, as we say, happy. That was a real challenge.
I was here 2 museums ago.
I was here back when it was at a whole different building, or we did this.
Yeah, I remember when, and hearing that phrase can lead to really great history and context when you're new to a job, and it can also be like, oh, here we go. And I've trained and worked with and managed docents for zoos and parks and rec and that kind of thing. So looking at outdoor stuff, typically, sometimes indoor things, and it's that balance and challenge, I think, especially as the new person, like you said, where we don't want to get rid of socializing, even if it's done with Zooms or online platforms or at a physical distance from each other when you're on site. Were there certain people that kind of were your cheerleaders or your advocates as volunteers or other employees who really kind of helped get the gospel out, get the word out to everybody that this is how we're doing things now? Or did you have to push to get people on board? Or another tactic doesn't have to be pushing to get people on board, buy-in.
I think we have a staff person who once upon a time was a docent. And so having her input from both sides of the fence really helped, because one of the things I do if I'm new to a space is, who do I need to get to know and who's going to be integral in helping me to do my job? Because we're one person. As you mentioned, getting the word out is a big challenge. Communicating changes, who needs to know when. Because for the first couple of weeks, honestly, there were still people going over my head because they weren't really sure. All right, well, you're here, but does that mean that I change this? So step one is I worked with my boss. She's the one that put out the message that, hey, there's a new sheriff in town. And we put together things that someone would need to contact me for. So if it's this situation or this list of scenarios, like if you need to cancel a shift, or if you're going to be late, or if you're not sure how to use the online sign-up system, that's a Brittni question. If it's related to docenting or education or something else, it's in this column. And so no worries, you're going to have to say the same thing over and over and over again. So it did take a few turns, but having that person on staff, I just tried to make myself see things from the perspective of both a visitor and as someone who was brand new. So I didn't come into it with that baggage. And so I think the staff really recognized, because they've been doing the job a little bit piecemeal. It's like, oh, to have one centralized HQ where everyone can go and I can send everyone. And if there's changes, this Brittni's going to let everyone know, so we're all on the same page. That took several weeks, but her name's Maria. Shout out to Maria.
Shout out Maria.
And just listening to the volunteers, it's going to take a while. I did several virtual meet and greets, and not everyone came. Not everyone thought, oh, okay, well, this person's not going to make that big of a difference. Or I'll see him when I come back to the museum. And several people still haven't come back. So just upping that communication. I also resurrected from the grave the volunteer newsletter, because I noticed.
I could see you like lifting it up, blowing dust and cobwebs off, shaking it out.
All right, when's the last time we did this? All right.
Archaeology,
Yes, cue the Indiana Jones theme song.
Yeah.
But yes, creating a centralized way to give messages to people, because we all know our volunteers talk to each other, and sometimes they talk to each other before they talk to us. And I figured that would be a really good way to thank them. I always want to thank people, even if they're not actively giving their time now, because everyone has a personal reason why or why not they're able to volunteer, but also to make sure that I have something to point to. So if someone says, oh, well, I didn't know we had to do that. Well, keep an eye on the newsletter. Like, we want you to stay tuned, because this is the best way to make sure we're all getting the same information. So the people that read it can inform the people that didn't read it. Saves me some time sometimes, but also everyone's getting the same. Like someone's coming out the town crier, nailing it to the door. Hey, read this.
Well, and it's good, and it's good to use if you know that we know that there's a culture of, again, socializing, talking to each other, and sometimes that game of telephone or a gossip culture can, not be so great, or lead to misunderstandings or miscommunications, or, people feeling like their feathers are ruffled because they're making assumptions that are incorrect based on 5 pieces of hearsay later. But I like that you leveraged the social network in person and online of the existing volunteers, docents, and staff members to help amplify the good news and your message, and that they have ownership of it, because they're talking about it and they're listened to and valued in the conversation.
Yeah, and especially when it came to retraining. So I think most of us can relate to, all right, 10 months ago, 24 months ago, it was different. We have people coming back and we love them. We want them to come back. But how are we going to get everyone the same information on all of these current procedures? What new paperwork do people need to return on site that wasn't required before? Or are there additional things that maybe they missed because they knew they weren't volunteering, so they just kind of tuned out for a while? So I have a reminders section. And then I have a did you know? So I purposely put those together, because if we have newer volunteers that don't know parts of our museum, it's inviting them to get to know that content, but also it makes them better at helping to continue to implement the changes, or to let people know, hey, this is an offer. So if it's something that's useful to you to bring up during a tour, or if someone asks you a question when you're out and about, I call it the floor, old retail experience. When
Yeah,
you're
oh
out and
yeah.
about on the floor,
Walking the floor.
walking the floor,
Go in front of
MOD,
house.
yeah, then we all know, even volunteers that have been there for 24 years may not know all of the features. So I never assume that anyone knows something, and I also don't assume that someone doesn't know something. So just leveling the playing field. But like I mentioned before, some of those programmatic changes, like offering less volunteer opportunities. I've heard a lot of my colleagues say, well, we used to have all this stuff that people could do, and it made it really easy to plug and play. People could get their service hours or set up a group project like that. Now we're offering less, and people are upset. Um, it's not always bad to recognize when someone else does your job better, whether that's another agency or, I like to help. If someone's coming to me with a request I can't fill, but hey, I have someone in my back pocket because I've networked and I'm a part of my volunteer engagement community in my area, ship those people over there.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be helpful. So if you have a holiday toy program, but you notice you're not the only one in the town that's doing that, could you pare down what you're doing by partnering with another agency, or just referring any of your stakeholders or clients or for neighbors in need to that other constituent that's doing it better, rather than compete? Because think about how much time you're going to be saving if this program's been established and you can help make their program better and it looks good on both of you, and the end result is your client is still getting the best service possible and people are still having a really good experience with serving people. I didn't want to just add virtual opportunities just to add them. Not everyone can do that, so it's okay to say I don't have that for you.
And it's urgent and important to recognize that in the necessary rush to put things online or give virtual opportunities, and the P word pivot, in the last couple of years, that can it can open up accessibility and equity in a lot of areas, especially around transportation and costs of commuting somewhere if you can do your role on your own time in a flexible schedule. And there's still a digital divide, and depending on what the infrastructure in the area looks like, not everyone will have access to a laptop, good fast internet, or the comfort or ability to work with technology in that way. Did you find that there was a digital divide barrier? Like, were some people feeling kind of left behind even for the things that did go online, or was that less of an issue at the museum?
Oh, most definitely. So one of the other things is I love a good survey. I am a data hound. I like to know why and why. And is it data or data? Uh, but I surveyed our
Qualitative
volunteer.
and quantitative.
Exactly. I surveyed our volunteers, and some of our volunteers that have been with us the longest really kind of lamented everything going online. Or I know it's necessary because of the pandemic, but I miss paperwork, or I miss the old way that we used to do things. Well, I like to create also walkthroughs. So with screenshots, when I meet people one-on-one, I'm going to ask them, what is your learning style? Are you an audio person? Are you good if I just tell you? Are you audio visual? So something like watching a video or having a podcast, or are you a tactile learner? Like, you need to have stuff in your hand, or you're show me, tell me. I don't know what that one's called, but modeling or shadowing the behavior that you've seen. And then that helps me realize, how do I need to get you the information, instead of assuming, well, it's the 21st century, you're just going to have to get online or you're not going to be able to volunteer. Um, Funny story, we use Google Sheets for our tour signups. So the docents have a combination of seeing the school groups, because a lot of them like to interact with the young folks, and signing up that way, or just signing up for like a stationary docent shift. And a lot of people don't know how to bookmark things. So I had to create a walkthrough on how to bookmark a Google Sheets. I even had some office time where, if you're having some issues, I'm in the museum on these days, let me know. I'm happy to come and book a classroom to show you how to do this. So anything that you can do to minimize that learning curve. But here, people, we're going to have a lot of people, well, where is this online? How do I find this? Put it in your handbook. Put it in the stuff that you're going to give volunteers from the get-go. Let them know when those things will change. We had quite a few volunteers who had Google Sheets from like 2020. Why can't I find the new tours? how come I don't know what's going on? I mean, I'm on the same emails as everybody else. So just not assuming that because people know how to use the internet and can send you an email, however lengthy it is, that they're good with all other facets of internet usage.
Completely. And whatever your write-up is on how to teach people to use bookmarks, I need that because over the weekend there was two different 30-minute conversations where my wife was talking to her dad and trying to explain that exact same thing over FaceTime with him with his laptop. And he's a pretty tech savvy dude for being in his 80s. And but again, it's like, oh, we think of that as something simple, but it's just a missing piece of information. And that goes into, as we were talking about this conversation, really solidifying the foundations of programs and procedures. And that is a big part of it, of understanding how people are learning and meeting them where they are with the skills or comfort level that they have with technology. What were some of the other ways that you kind of had to rebuild or shore up the foundation when you came on board?
So redoing those volunteer handbooks, we realized we can't write every possible scenario, and we don't want to make a rule for something that's a one-off, but virtualizing the onboard process. So we have a multi-step process, and because it's multi-step, not everyone is going to make it all the way through to the finish line and become a volunteer and stick the landing, and Russia gives them a 7. Not always going to happen.
They get the gold. They stand on the podium. They get the gold.
we get the fun wave. So letting people know if this is a lengthy process, using that affirming language like "welcome aboard," "we're happy to have you," "here are the next steps," giving people self-guided PowerPoints. So that's one of the things that I love that we do is, after the background check process, we're going to give you some of the training and give you a preview. So in an hour and a half, which is what our usual in-person orientation is, we're not rehashing the wheel or trying to teach an entire class. We're just going to go back over some of the information, really hit the highlights, having modules and quizzes. We use a system called Moodle that was new with our docents and allows them more of a self-paced kind of environment. Not everyone's going to learn at the same pace or even absorb information. Some people really need to sit with it for a while before they have questions. So if you're doing a class and you're like, oh, no one has questions, just let them know. I know I hit you with a lot. Let it marinate. If you have a question at 2:00 in the morning, I'm not going to be here, but my email is always on. Feel free to reach out and let me know. And any other sort of videos, like we have a visual walkthrough tour. One of the questions I asked during our volunteer interview process is, have you visited the museum before? Some people feel really guilty. I'm like, oh, well, don't worry about that. There's this little thing called COVID, we've all been dealing with.
Just a years-long, global pandemic. No biggie. No big deal.
Just an experience.
Slight change of plans.
Yeah.
Mass, disruptive event. It's fine.
Yeah. Not since the bubonic plague.
There's no guilt in missing anything anymore. Thank goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Takes that off. But we have visual videos. We have a YouTube page. Hey, you haven't been here? You can go here. We're going to give the fastest highlight tour of your life during orientation. But if you want to take a deeper dive, there you go. Or we encourage you to come. Changing volunteer management systems was a big one, as people's budgets and capacity may have shrunk during the pandemic. There's no one system, I'm sorry, folks, that's going to do everything that you want it to do.
There isn't. I'm the first to say that, and I've consulted for a number of VMS companies over the years, and they're usually also the first to admit that, well, our VMS is good at these few things, that other one is good at those few things. Nothing's good at everything.
No. So, there's not going to be the smorgasbord of volunteer management software buffet that's going to have all the foods you like to eat. So maybe that's something you needed to take a look at. We use a system called Patron Manager. So folks out there that are familiar with Salesforce, I know Volgistics is pretty popular, or Better Impact. So just taking a look, don't be afraid to benchmark either. Benchmarking among other members of my community when we have programmatic changes helps, because then if I do that research anyway, I know my boss and the higher ups are going to believe me because I'm the expert in-house, but it really adds some extra ethos to say, well, I've polled my community and this is what they're doing. So we could do a hodgepodge of this, or what parts of this do you like, and write up something. And instead of building more, just shoring up what we have, because I think sometimes it's very easy to get overextended and build this house of cards and say, oh, it's really cool. And I spent all this time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears building this thing. But is it going to last in the long run? Are you building a sandcastle or a brick house? Is the next wave going to take you out or not? So being creative really, really helps.
And that strong foundation. I mean, it's back to basics. And again, you and I as musicians, and we'll have a whole side conversation about that because we'll dig into that. Maybe it'll be a bonus video. That'll be like a little bonus video where we dork out about cool music stuff. But it's like you can't practice the foundational things on any instrument enough. You never stop practicing foundational techniques or knowledge in music. And I think that gets forgotten. Like you said, there's new, there's shiny. We're constantly getting sales pitch calls for different kinds of software or try this app. But if the basics and the solid foundation isn't there, you can't expand on it. And then if you're hit with a crisis, it's harder to pare that down. So again, meeting people where they are and letting them self-select. A lot of times I think as leaders of volunteers, or an old school mindset is like a possession, or these are my people and I am in charge of them. So this idea of, it's like, you know what, people are going to drift in and out of orbit. Sometimes the lead singer quits the band and you get, more musical metaphors here on Tuesday Tips and Priceless Advice. And I think that's so important that also you're working smarter and not just harder in that extra effort to take it for, like, here's where you find the information, dig deeper if you want to. And I think, and getting that empowerment and that agency that they're in charge of their learning journey and you're setting it up for them to set them up for success, and they get to choose how much they participate in that, and that influences what they're doing at the museum.
Yeah, just be grateful for the time that people have. People really will choose to make time for something that is meaningful in their life. And you can't say, oh, well, yes, everyone can be a volunteer, but can everyone volunteer with your agency? Can everyone volunteer with what it is that you are offering? And sometimes that's no, and that's fine. I've noticed a lot with the younger generations that they're in it for a good experience, but maybe not for the long haul, like some of the earlier iterations of volunteers are. So I think a lot of us talk about, oh, well, after COVID, I'm going to do this, or post-COVID, or when things are back to, in air quotes, normal.
No such thing. No such thing.
No such thing. I don't think there was really a normal before, but
it wasn't a good normal. I mean, speaking from my lived experience, I have a pretty happy, nice life at this point in personal life and career. And 2019 wasn't that great.
Yeah. If we're being honest.
I mean, it didn't get better, but I think it brought forth a lot of things we had to fix in society, and particularly in nonprofit missions and programs. And like we were mentioning before, we don't want to keep, there's certain jargon that's come up in the last couple of years that feels overused, like the new normal, back to normal, pivoting. But how would you recommend letting go of that post-COVID attitude?
I like what you said. Like, when we're waxing nostalgic and we're putting on our rose-colored glasses and looking at back in the day, yeah, we paid $2 for milk, but everybody was poor. So do we want to go back to that?
You made $2 a week, and you paid $2 for a gallon of milk, a stick of butter, and a loaf of bread.
Yeah. I think unpredictability is here to stay, especially in our field, because we work with people, and people are always going to be different. But changes in available volunteer population due to changing life factors. What is retirement anyway? If you're always going for the retired volunteer, who are you now trying to get to? Financial instability. You have to have some measure of leisure time in your life if you're not completely or semi-retired, or one of those people that retired at 42. If that's you, please come and talk to me.
But we're also, like, basically Gen X and under is still struggling with the gig economy, and people who are retirement Social Security age have to keep working.
Yeah.
So I agree that model, that really outdated model should go out the door along with, when COVID is over. It's like, pandemic to endemic is a different kind of adaptation, but there's no 2010s. Sorry, Swifties and everybody else. There's no going back to our snap pop
Yeah. So I just say,
glory.
look at what it was that you really loved about those times. Was it air quote easier volunteering? Are you a person that likes to be out in public and you miss going to those huge volunteer expos? Okay, well, the flip side of those huge volunteer expos and all of those things were they really a good use of your time? Were you going just to go for some, development goal? Were you really reaping what you sowed out of that? I think for the post-COVID attitude, at least for me, and my tip for anyone else is evaluate why we're doing something. If we're doing it just to do it, or because we've always done it, or this is what someone else told me to do, is that really the best fit for you? Is it the best fit for your program? Is it the best fit for your volunteers? Preventing volunteer burnout, I think, needs to move up to the top of that list. There have been really awesome volunteers who give of their everything. When you say thank you to your volunteers, thank their family as well. They are giving up that time to spend with you and to advance your mission. They're not hanging out with grandkids or hanging out with the wife, or the husband, or the spouse person. So I think moving up the volunteer burnout for the post-COVID attitude, the back to normal, letting your volunteers know it's okay to take a break. Will we be slower? Will we serve slightly less neighbors in need? Will we produce less product? Yeah, probably. But is it going to be better for you? Are you going to have opportunities to maybe be less cranky? Or I notice volunteers kind of can get snippy at each other. Well, I was here, 2 days ago, and we fed over 1,000 people. And you're here on a 50-person day, and you're just moving so slow. Let your volunteers know it's okay to take a break. Encourage those breaks. If you're not feeling well, if you're not feeling enthused, if you're not happy when you come to volunteer, if it's become more like a job you don't really like,
Or chore.
then take a step back, because you're bringing that attitude with you. And same with volunteer managers. If you're having to do stuff because I'm told to, or you're not really finding out how something you're asked to do fits into your program, you're going to have to explain that to a volunteer. So make sure that you have the right reasons for doing something. Implementing those changes by getting the word out, communicating who needs to know, how and when. How do you communicate with your volunteers? If it's 60% of them do email and you need to call the other 40%, you need to make time in your schedule to do that. If it's making programmatic changes, if it's paring down and offering less, make sure you get the buy-in of the people around you. Don't just make an arbitrary change. I'm not saying you have to give a reason to your volunteers to do everything, but sometimes they just need to know that, you have to switch from like friend mode to parent mode.
Yeah.
And you can't always do both at the same time. And then letting go of that post-COVID attitude. If it's not a normal that you enjoyed, why are we in such a rush to return to it? I think we should build for a new better, not build back to normal. Because that didn't work for everybody before. It's not working now. If anything, COVID's done is just like, oh, hey, there's a happy little bubble. I see you having a good time. Nope.
Yeah. Pop.
That's not going to work, and that's not going to work, and that's not going to work. So being creative and flexible, knowing that unpredictability is always a part of our life, was always part of our life, and it's definitely not going anywhere. Just cut yourself some slack. Give yourself a break. Nobody's perfect.
Give yourself a break. Take a breath. And another musical metaphor, because I play wind instruments too, of take turns taking breaths.
Yes.
I've talked about this it's come up a lot in other conversations, and just using that if you're in a choir, if you're like me playing French horn or trumpet in symphonic band in high school or college or whatever, it's like nobody breathes at the same time. You support each other by alternating taking breaks, and it doesn't serve the team when someone pushes themselves to burnout, because some are those personality types, just as much as it doesn't serve the team where someone's checked out all the time because they just don't need to be in that role anymore because they got other priorities in life and death, family care, but they feel like I gotta stick through this for some sense of obligation or duty, and that freedom to say, you're not, we rely on a certain number of team members to get the work done, and let's be honest with each other of when we need to stop and take a breath, take a step back, go into an outer orbit or another role that's less intense or less demanding, and also allow people who do have the energy to step forward. They've just taken a big breath and they can sing that really loud note that keeps the song going. So a song isn't going to stop. We just have to, take turns supporting each other and take a breath.
Yes, and a rest can be. I love our musical metaphors right now.
Everyone else is going to be like, how did I come away knowing more music theory after this priceless advice? It's like, oh, it's Brittni and Dana's conversation. Yeah.
If we help you answer a Jeopardy question, you're welcome.
Exactly.
But taking a rest is also it's integral to music. If you don't think that hearing people work, I call those crescendo people. If you're always crescendoing, they're building, they've popped, they're building again, that is not a good song to listen to. You don't want to hear the person in the orchestra with the cymbals crashing all the time.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of quiet goes a long way. It builds anticipation. It gives the people time to rest their lungs and their fingers and, kind of stretch. It gives everyone a sense of time to look around and say, all right, are we on the same page? Did you need to catch up? Was your time a little slow? Was I a little too fast? So those rest periods
have we changed
awesome.
Keys?
Yeah. Are we still playing the same?
Are we in the same key?
So are we on the same? But also, we can put this back in forward is if you need to give your volunteers jobs that are mission critical but are not operational. So if you have that food pantry, is that a place where you need to hire some people so you can take off some of the really big burden of being both operational and saving yourself if people can't come to work that day or you can't recruit enough volunteers? That really begins to affect your neighbor's need. Or, we have a museum. If we don't have any docents on staff that day, well, our guests can still have a really great time and be none the wiser because of the way that we've set things up. So that was a big takeaway for me is from moving from one area to another and seeing how we do that is if you don't have any volunteers, is it okay? It's going to have to be okay at some point. There's just going to be times where no one can do that. They're sick, or you have your list of people you can call, your aces in the hole, and none of them are available. That means sometimes that might be you.
And you're using up social capital. You're calling in favors, and I've been with agencies where I was younger and less experienced, and the department just wasn't resourced correctly. Where it just felt like that demand every weekend was, oh, here's the classic stereotypical example. Here's one day's notice that we need 20 people to booth an event tomorrow was a classic ask back in the day. Early 2000s, the beginning of Taylor Swift. Picture it. The setting, we've set the painting up, and that idea of always being in urgent need, urgent. That means something else has to be solved. Get back to that foundation, rebuild the basics, pare down what you have to pare down. Or, like you said, being data nerds, create the data viz, the visualization or the report that demonstrates this is actually better served as resourced as a paid full-time staff position, or 2 or 3. And then volunteers can be utilized to build the capacity, augment the mission. They're still doing very necessary, impactful work. And this is showing us that if too many people are donating their time and talent or burning out or can't handle that workload, that needs to be re-examined. Again, for everybody's comfort and well-being and sense of belonging and support in the organization.
Because when a volunteer leaves, they're not just leaving an open position. They're taking with them all of the archival knowledge, all of the time and care and stewardship that you have put into them. And sometimes they're just a natural end to the relationship. And that's great. Please thank them and do an exit interview if you're not currently doing that to see how you can improve the experience for other people. But that's your time and energy walking out of the door. So you can't assume, well, this person completed the onboarding, now I'm just going to write them hard. And especially what you said with the urgent needs. You can use urgent, and I'm all a big fan of if I really need help and I'm desperate, using those words.
Then you use the strong words.
Yes.
The spicy words.
But if that's every time, then eventually it's going to
The Kid Who
Yeah.
Cried Wolf, The Sky Is Falling. And it's like, and I actually just did, it just came out today, a related Tuesday tip, and we're recording this on February 1st, so your Tuesday tips will be in February as well. But just today, that idea that when you're too focused on recruitment and just solving recruitment, it's like there's probably a lot of other things you need to solve than just that. But if you're always saying we need volunteers, urgent, 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 people tune that out, and no one wants to join a sinking ship. Quite frankly, it's like
No.
if you're in chaos all the time, and everyone sees from your ads and calls for volunteers that it feels like very desperate and chaotic. That's like the clingy date where you're like, "Ooh, no thanks, red flags." It's kind
Yeah,
of
it's like,
that's
hi, I'll
what
have the
happens.
spaghetti. What are your plans for marriage and children?
Yeah.
No one asks
I
questions
want
on
2.7 children. The growth and education schedule. Like
Yeah, there's some people that really like that. I've had volunteers who are like, I don't want to do the regular stuff. Put me on the hard jobs.
great,
Give me the thing that nobody else wants to do.
great.
Awesome. That's not everybody.
Yeah,
Because if your recruitment's always going to be another issue. I notice a lot when I go to conferences or when people, get me alone in the room. How do you recruit? How do you recruit? You recruit by having a good foundation that invites people to stay, that invites people to give feedback, that doesn't overtax the volunteer or make not good use of their time. That's how you solve the recruitment issue. You have a program that wants people to come back, because what do people do when they like something? They'll tell other people. Your volunteers are the best form of recruitment. I did everywhere that you could post online. I've done Facebook ads. I've used my personal LinkedIn. I've done all of that stuff, but nobody can be a better advocate of why to spend their time somewhere than someone who is already doing that. So if you
yeah,
haven't asked your volunteers to recruit for you, start there, but have something that they want to actually come and do.
yeah.
As if,
And yes,
go
and
ahead.
to all of that. Oh, yeah, I know, we're improvising. Yes, and to all of that. Plus, I love having, especially if I'm able to update a program or help build it from the ground up, like, what's the 10-second, 30-second elevator pitch that everyone can learn that talks about quick mission, how to volunteer, how to be a donor or support, or how to just enjoy programs. If every single person who could possibly answer a phone or answer an email or interact with the public has that baseline messaging, that word of mouth, that's better than any bot media. That's earned trust. That's earned community trust from that great experience and that solid foundation that people have.
Most definitely. And not everyone, like, we have a fair amount of overlap between our donor base and our volunteers. Not everyone is going to have that, but we have a membership table that just lives at the museum. So anyone there, hey, apply the cost of your ticket to a membership. That's great. But when I got there, there were no asks for volunteers. Like, hey, that person has paid for a ticket. Let's say that ticket's $16. Well, according to the US Labor Bureau of Statistics, it's $24 and some change for a volunteer hour. So guess what? Volunteers are technically worth more than the cost of admission. So, hey, marketing, help me come up with a really good one-page flyer, because the young kids are really into these QR code things. That's been a great something that's grown out of COVID. Let's teach someone to talk about that along with the other things. Let's have those available. Let's talk about volunteering during programs. That's a nut I'm still trying to crack, is inviting people at every, hey, did you like this program? You can help be a part of making things like this possible by being a volunteer. There's no shame in asking. All people can say is no, and then you're right back where you started. But if they say yes, well, then that's a double points achievement.
That's a perfect coda to bring it back around. I want to circle back because I think it's important to highlight what we were talking about early in the conversation and kind of bring it around again of this idea of sharing is caring and not having possession of a team of people, and that, like, that's so
You don't own me.
problematic in so many ways. And I feel people like my volunteers are like the people you work with on your team. Uh, but this idea that people will do what they want to do, and we should encourage and support them in doing what they want to do with your organization, with other organizations. And I've had to, it sounds like you have as well, so many times in throughout my career, I've had to convince all the other people on staff or the executive leadership that we don't have to worry, like, well, how do we keep people from volunteering for this other org? Like, why should we stop them? The wider experience they have in the community, and if they're having a good time at both agencies, that's win 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 across the board. So this idea that, well, we have to keep them engaged and hooked in at every opportunity, it's like, no, engagement needs to be fully consensual
Yes.
and interesting and enjoying. That's why it's engagement is something resonates with people in how you're describing the role, the kind of the mission that you're doing. I just like museums a lot. Like, I like the idea of museums. Whatever that is that they are digging, like, let them have that enthusiasm and that interest and that passion. And if they also want to be at the animal shelter on the weekends, then that doesn't hurt anybody. And the idea that, give people that, again, that empowerment and that permission, and have it in the culture that they can, commit to what they're committed to in their training and their shifts or roles or projects, and that there's flexibility and there's no shame and, like, I got to take a leave of absence. I'm actually,
Yeah.
this doesn't fit in my life anymore. I got to find something completely different, or I don't resonate with this anymore. I got to find something completely different. And there's, like, no shame in that game of letting people self-select in a hectic, dangerous time
Oh,
where they
most
want to
definitely.
do with their life.
And I think the public, something that we might not be aware of as volunteer administrators, is that the public feels that guilt from us.
Yes.
I've noticed lately during the volunteer interview process, there's people that are semi-retired or students like, oh, well, I can do these parts of onboarding, but I'm not going to be available until March or April for these other things. That's fine. I love for our volunteers to have lives outside of us. When would be a good time to follow up with you, put a note on your calendar, and reach back out when it's a time that's going to work for them? So that's where you have to maintain a little bit of flexibility. Does everyone love a set schedule? Yes, but anyone who's been in our field knows that that's not really a thing that happens too often. If you come to work from 8 to 5 and you just do the same thing every day, kudos to you. I would wither and die of boredom. But don't feel bad. Have plenty of options for them. Let them take the lead on how far and how fast they want to go. If they complete the background check and they complete the other stuff, but they can't come to in-person orientation for a few weeks, reach out to them, reiterate those steps, and say, we're so glad that you finally have time. I wouldn't say finally, let me back that up. We're so glad that you have time that we fit in your lives now. I'm really grateful for any time that you choose to dedicate to us. No, you don't have to volunteer every Tuesday until Kingdom Come, just as I saw you Tuesday last week. We gave our volunteers the flexibility to choose a shift and a frequency that works for them. Let them know up front if you have any weekly, monthly, hourly volunteer hours requirements. We did once upon a time for docents, it's like you have a professional driver's license. You need so many hours on the road. But we quickly recognized that because I came on board, I wasn't going to immediately start slapping those parameters in. Give it some time. Still have a large chunk of our population that's not comfortable with coming back. So it's not fair to enforce rules that really are going to be hard for people to do, period, the end. Um, Thank them for their time. So you want to have a volunteer appreciation something. I find an invitation in the form of like a survey, like, ask about their dietary restrictions, slap in a question. How do you like to best feel appreciated?
Yeah.
Have a drop down. Hey, always have an open-ended question as well, but kind of preface, I may not be able to do everything, but your feedback is instrumental to growing and stewarding this program. Thank you for giving me your opinion.
Yeah.
Then people feel heard instead of, I have to try and corner this person. Those people always exist. But when people feel like you're giving them ample opportunity to say something, if they see something, or say something if they think there's a better idea, and then don't take credit for the idea. It's just that simple. We've listened to you, and because of that, we're doing this. Thank you. We'd like to do more things like this. What can we do to continue to make you happy? I think a large part of our job is hospitality and listening.
Absolutely. And active listening, and knowing that people want to feel valued and heard. Every single survey I've done, particularly with zoos and museums, for ongoing volunteers or even exit interviews, is how do you want to be recognized? I want to basically boils down to, I want my ideas heard and my time to be meaningful and valued. Like, I want to be heard. I want my suggestions, because I've been here for 25 years and I have good ideas, to not be dismissed. Some form of that answer has been consistent. Very few people want a party or a potluck or an ice cream social. That's fine to have those options for the people. I would work with agencies. The same 50 or 60 people out of 500 or 600 would turn up to the party. Nobody else cares about the party.
Yes.
Why are we spending so much time and money and resources? It's like, let there be, let people form, again, so not physical distance sometimes necessary, but let them form the socializing that they have, and they can use the space, worksite space, to organize lots of little different social events for each other. And again, like, have the people at the party be on the party committee, hand that over to somebody
Yes.
who wants to do it, and then recognize everyone by, here, these are your ideas in action. You told us in the survey, and now this is happening, and you're part of this team, and we listen to you, and this is why it's happening. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm so delighted that you've achieved the balance, the perfect harmony.
And because you're listening to them, then when you do have to put on your parent hat and implement those changes or change those programs, people have less feathers ruffled. You're not going to, have a knockdown drag out, because they know at heart you are listening to them, and any changes that you're making are for the betterment of the program. So it's increasing their enjoyment of doing what they already like. It's increasing the public or whoever your stakeholders or neighbors need. It's increasing their ability to get something out of that program. And then you're moving together as a unit. Not every general gets to make, fun decisions. There's going to be some things that are particular pain points, but when they know that you listen and you take what they want to do to heart, that's the easiest part. People said they wanted more volunteer social things. Okay, we found a good day with nice weather. We invited a few people out of maybe 150-ish, maybe more volunteers. We had 35 people come out. You're not going to get everybody. And I didn't even bother doing a program. I did a get to know you kind of musical chairs thing of, what do you like about volunteering? What would you tell people when they're first starting out? What are your biggest challenges? And they're seeing that as, oh, this is a great time that we get to talk. And, there's cross-tier volunteer, cross-generational, magical things happening. But also I'm listening, and I took all of those giant sticky notes back to my desk, and I boiled it down to, what are some things I'm seeing over and over again? And people didn't even wait for the end of the day. Thank you so much for having this. Do a little something, and then just let them talk. That's what they're going to do anyway. That's what they want to do. People haven't seen each other in 24 odd months. They just want an opportunity to socialize. Then your volunteer tiers are less siloed. People can look up to the volunteers that are more tenured by knowing a little bit of what to expect, and know that they're going to be respected and cared for and steward well throughout each process. And you're going to get people to stick around. There's always going to be people that are going to give you 20 hours in JIT. That's great. Just make sure it's the best 20 hours, that it works best for both of you. And if they choose not to come back, thank you for your time. What could I have done to encourage you to stay? Or are you willing to come in on maybe a more part-time basis? Or I'd love to keep your volunteer account active so that you can stay in the know with our news, still receive our newsletter. And if at any point you want to no longer receive those, it's not a problem. Let me know. Don't make it a guilt burden thing to have someone leave or to feel bad about taking a step back.
And that builds that trust. That builds that culture of trust and transparency, that I like to phrase it like, you build up that trust that we're all in this together. That if you're having, I like the opportunity to be grumpy. Sometimes I take too many opportunities to be grumpy. I just try not to do it on Zoom meetings or in professional client interactions. And I was like, I'm going to be grumpy in my music room, and I'm going to just wait for this mood to pass. Like, everyone's got good days and bad days, but that transparency that you got each other's backs. You're there for each other. There's a solid foundation to the program that everyone can rely on. There's some consistency for the people who really, want that consistency. And there's that freedom to improvise, to self-select, to have a flexible schedule, to take a leave, take a breath, take a rest when you need to do that in the whole of it. And I'm just so glad that we have had a chance to chat today. And again, we might have to make a little side bonus video where we're like playing instruments over a Zoom app to sync it up or something.
Jam out with volunteer management.
I mean, I have rather in legendary ways. I've sometimes incorporated my musical skills into the work we do.
Well, one of my favorite quotes, I'm a bit of a Shakespeare nerd, is the end of Hamlet, the rest is silence. Contemplate. Yes, your program may have had to die a horrible, horrible death, but what is going to rise out of that you can still use? So your Hamlet 2.0, your Hamlet's dad come back as a ghost. However that resonates with you, but sometimes doing nothing is still a form of action. Sometimes you got to be that fly on the wall. So don't do. The orchestra needs an intermission. Nobody can play all the way through a show and not look worse for wear. So be nice to yourself.
Do.
Yes.
Some doing, some being, some do, some doing, some being. And alas, poor York, we knew him well. I love we've had some very great artistic genre references in this conversation.
We need to include a glossary.
I might just be, and again, like someone will walk away like, I suddenly know so much more music theory than I ever got all through high school from this conversation. And Brittni, thank you so much for your Tuesday tips. Thank you for this deeper conversation and all of your priceless advice. Someday we'll have a sequel called Night at the Museum, Part 3.
The volunteers go bad.
The volunteer party, Night at the Museum.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. It's been excellent. I always learn so much from you. I know I'm on your Facebook page. I'm on the CVA Facebook page at large. So it's nice for me, who's always learning, who's a longtime lurker, first-time poster. It's
Welcome to the fan forum.
It's nice to be included. And because today is Lunar New Year, Gunpei Fatoi to those who celebrate. You can't see my shirt. It's cheetahs.
Oh,
I don't have a tiger, but and I have red pants on. So happy everything to those who celebrate. Thanks again for the opportunity. I can't wait for this to come out.